right, good afternoon. This is Hap May with the Legal Play.
Hi, Hap, and I'm Chelsea El-Azzi. Today, Hap, we are going to be talking about 1031 like-kind exchanges.
Right. Okay, we can do that.
I actually don't know too much about this. I remember a little bit from my federal income tax class I took while I was in law school. And my understanding about it is basically if you've got some, real property that you're trying to, sell or transfer.
Sell, and for which you're going to reinvest in other real estate. That's the scenario, and it's a tax provision.
Right. That
it's really not a real estate, and there's real estate involved in it. It's really a question, and it stems from the notion that the sale or other disposition of real estate is a taxable event.
Right.
For which a taxpayer will take the amount of money he receives, money or other compensation he receives, as his sales price. He will then look and see what his basis is, which is usually historic costs plus improvements minus whatever depreciation has been taken on the property. And sometimes you have people that have held property for a long period of time and there is a significant gain, but they're really just going to take that money and move to a different location. The example I would like to use is an auto dealer who may have purchased the property in the 1960s and built in an area that now the town has grown and there's a freeway that's been built, and then he'd sooner sell that piece of property so somebody could develop a shopping center or an office park or something. There's the property, which is usually fairly large. Auto dealers tend to have a lot of acreage because they have their showroom and their repair shop and places to park cars. So there's a good footprint of land there, and sometimes if it's been around for 40 or 50 years, it's time for that neighborhood to have something else there.
Right.
There's a higher use for that property, for which the car dealer can make a lot of money, but it says, well, but if I'm going to make that money, I got to pay a bunch of taxes. Then I got to go out, go into a little more suburbia and buy some more land out there and stuff like that.
And I'll have less work with because I will have had to pay taxes out of.
Right. And we don't want to have that transaction not take place, because it's generally good for the economy and good for society to have old uses of real estate kind of updated with something more which creates a bigger tax base for the locality.
Mm-hmm.
It creates more economic activity, things like that. And the car dealer can go out someplace which is now a better place for him, near a freeway, near suburbia, where a lot of car buyers, live or drive by in the process. So that's we want that transaction to take place, and we don't want taxes to get in the way of having that to occur.
So how does that work if you want to use the 1031 provision?
So if I am that car dealer, or anybody who holds real estate for a use in business or for investment purposes.
Does it have to be real estate?
It has to be real estate, but the definition of what real estate is, which we'll get to in a few minutes here, is broad.
Okay.
In the process, buildings, land, mineral interests in oil and gas interests.
Okay.
Interest in coal mines. I mean, there's a lot of different things that qualify.
Okay.
As real estate for this purpose. So what happens there is the car dealer negotiates to sell the land, negotiates in new suburbia to buy some land, near the freeway in the process, and times them so that they kind of fall, roughly within the same few months of each other in the process. And there's a forward exchange and a reverse exchange, but so long as they happen within 6 months of each other, and certain other requirements about escrowing money, not receiving money, are met. And there's an intermediary, and if it's reverse exchange, a title exchange, combination title holder in the process. As long as there's middle people in fact, so that the taxpayer doesn't ever get his hands on the money, or also doesn't take title to the property until the transaction is completed. Basically, the taxes are deferred. So if somebody had paid $10 for a property that's now worth 100, and they go out and they sell that, putting the money into this escrow intermediator arrangement, stuff like that, and then identifies a new property within 45 days and closes on that property within 6 months, and that property is at least 100. So let's say that
roughly the same value.
The same value and stuff like that. So all the proceeds are used up. Then there will be no tax. Even though he paid 100 for this property, his basis will carry over, and he'll have a $10,000 basis. So 40 years later, when he sells, that property, if he doesn't again replace it with some 1031 money, he would have a $10,000 basis, and the gain would be deferred until the sale of the newly acquired, or what we call replacement property, is made, which could be many years down the road.
What happens if you can't find and close on another property within that 6-month window?
Then if you can't find any property that works, a couple things that happen. One is you just bust the 1031 and go back and treat it as if it were taxable from day one. That's one possibility. Another possibility is, okay, so I didn't find this, but I can still invest it in some form of real estate. And that could be, as I said, an oil and gas interest. And there are oil and gas interests that brokers that could put that together and have you buy a fraction of an oil and gas to cover exactly what you need. There are also what they call tenants in kind arrangements, where they have McDonald's does this. Some of the big superstores do this, where you can buy 4 McDonald's restaurants, or the land on the 4 McDonald's restaurants, and then rent it to McDonald's and stuff like that. And that would qualify. So if I had $1 million, sell my $1 million ranch, I could buy 4 the land or 4 McDonald's sit and rent the building to McDonald's, the McDonald's franchise on the process. And I've got a good like-kind exchange.
Okay.
It's real property held for a business or investment. Real property held for business investments. I make the exchange, and that works. There's also Delaware statutory trusts, which courts have found that so long as they meet certain requirements, that's real estate. So you can buy a beneficial interest in a Delaware statutory trust that owns some real estate. It could be a big pool of real estate, a portion of it. And that can qualify.
I remember we were working with a bank that does a lot of trusteeships, and some of what I remember that bank doing was they had I guess funds where it was kind of like
Right.
kind of exchanges where they held certain property that people could invest in, and I guess that would
Yes.
be a temporary holding place until you figure
That
out
could be
where-
temporary holding period, because you could do that, and that so you take your ranch or your car dealership and you put the money into a Delaware statutory trust or some sort of tenant in kind arrangement or stuff like that. Some oil and gas properties you have, which are readily marketable, and you hold on to it for a year or two. Then you figure, oh, well, here's this new ranch I want, or new car dealership location I want. So I will sell my intermediate property here, my Delaware statutory trust or my oil and gas interest, sell those. And I make money, I lose money, on that transaction. Maybe I try to defer whatever gain I have on that additionally or something like that. But there's a transaction to account for there. But then I get my new property, and I've deferred most or all of the gain I had from the sale of the first property. And even though it's longer than the 6-month period, because I went from property A to property B to property C, done right, I can defer the gain I have on the first property.
Are there any other creative ways, that 1031s can be used beyond just property for property exchange?
There's property for property is a general rule.
Right.
There was a point in time, for a long point in time, where we could do that with personal property, airplane for an airplane. Hearst and Avis.
I'll say not when I took
rental property, like rent cars,
Mhm.
and they get their old fleet and they do like kind of exchange for a new fleet, and they wouldn't pay any gain on the, gain they had on the first fleet in the process until they sell the second fleet. And that went away in 2017 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Okay.
At the same point in time, it might not have been necessary for a lot of small businesses because they have these large bonus depreciation where you can buy $2 million worth of equipment and immediately deduct it. So having the like kind of exchange may not be necessary because you sell your old equipment, have a gain or loss, but then you buy your new equipment, have this immediate bonus depreciation number. So it may not have been necessary.
Okay.
And it was a little pickier because you had to be the same kind of use.
Yeah, and I feel like that would be
not true with real property.
That's what I was going to ask, because if you're getting into the same kind of use and whether or not it's like relatively the same value for value, style, model, whatever, for real property, it doesn't have to be, a car dealership lot for a car dealership lot, a house for a house.
It could be a car dealership or, a ranch for oil and gas property, or the land the McDonald's building sits on. Just so long as it's used in a trade business. I once, and this doesn't work anymore because I think like the 1983 or 84 Tax Act changed this, but I once worked on a transaction, exchanged a office building in Boston, Massachusetts for a section of a marble mine in Italy. Now, 40 years ago, they did away with this. You can sell domestic real estate and get foreign real estate because they kind of lost track of what happened to foreign real estate. So that was an abuse. So in 1983 or 84, they cut that out. So now, like kind of exchange, domestic for domestic real estate, and it includes the territories in addition to the actual 50 states in Washington, D.C. Also, foreign for foreign still works. So if I sell one ranch in Brazil for office building in Brazil, I'm okay.
Okay.
Now, Brazil might not think so. Brazil might want some taxes.
It is interesting. I know Brazil has some of their own tax nuances. Yes. So yeah.
Yes, as in most countries have their own tax. That's what people say about the United States. Yeah, they have their own tax nuances.
Okay, sounds pretty straightforward to me.
It's pretty straightforward. There's some procedural requirements. You have to have a intermediary to hold money.
Okay.
And there's a qualified intermediary. It doesn't take much to qualify, but they basically have to be disinterested and not have an ownership interest in the transaction and some other few other qualifications. That's not hard to do. The money has to be kept in a separate escrow account, not commingled with any other money. And you got to notify the intermediary of what 3 properties you might use to replace this one property. They have 6 months to close.
Okay.
On that reverse exchange. A reverse exchange would be where say I'm at a car dealer and say, okay, I'm gonna move from this location to this location, but I need to buy this location first and then start moving my inventory and my infrastructure. So I need to hold both properties for a little while. So I buy the new property. I don't buy it. I fund the purchase of it. I get an exchange accommodation title holder, much like a intermediary on heels title and not money. And then I have 6 months to sell the relinquished property, and I would still qualify.
Okay.
And that's kind of how 1031s work. I will add, sometimes people come to me and say, well, I've got this one rent house. I'm going to sell it and buy another rent house. And I want to do a 1031 exchange. So let me hire an intermediary. Let me pay a lawyer to this. And I said, well, okay, how much is the gain that you pay? Not the proceeds and so on, price. They say, how much is the gain you're going to do? And they may say, well, this is $20,000. And I said, well, okay, so you're going to pay, $3,000 or $4,000, to do this and save. Like, what kind of tax bracket you in? And back in the day when there was only a 15% capital gain rate, I used to advise a lot of people not to do this. Don't do that much work to save 15%, particularly when you later on when you resell that, that 15% capital gains rate is going to be gone, which by and large I was correct. If you have any significant amount of income, 15,000, 15% capital gains rate is gone. Generally 23.8% is what you'd be looking at now. So if you got if you got a lot of income and it's a lot of gain, yeah, let's look at doing deferred like-kind exchange. But if it's a small amount of money, pay the tax. It's easier than paying the cost of doing this. And additionally, when you buy your new property, if it's depreciable, like it's got a building on it, depreciation, you would want a higher basis in that, so that you can take ordinary deductions of depreciation over the years. So you can take your capital gain on the sale, take depreciation over the years on your property, and there's kind of a net cat gain. But if that's not the facts, big gain, maybe you don't have a lot of depreciation in the factor, maybe you would be in that high tax bracket and would pay 23.8% tax on it. Like-kind exchange is an option.
Okay,
All right.
good to know.
All right.
Thanks, Hap.
This is Hap May with Legal Play.